Okay, so everybody's seen the movie Rounders, right? And at the end of the movie, Mikey finally picks up on Teddy KGB's tell. And what is it? Well, they don't ever really tell us, so we just have to guess, but he's breaking open some Oreo cookies, and apparently if he eats the cookie, he's got a good hand, or if he doesn't eat the cookie, he's bluffing, or something like that. Now, if you're worried because when you play poker, you don't catch on to tells like those, just remember that that kind of thing is dramatized for the movies a lot. And most of the poker tells that you'll pick up on have to do with how someone plays their hand, whether they check or bet, their bet size, patterns that develop from hand to hand. You put all those pieces of the puzzle together and you get a more real-life poker tell, as opposed to the way someone eats an Oreo cookie in a movie. Now, that's not to say that those kind of tells don't ever happen. They do, and you will spot them from time to time as you get more experienced. Maybe someone always scratches their head when they have a good hand, or something like that. It's been known to happen, and you will see those from time to time. But remember that most of your poker tells will be the way someone plays a hand. So let's take a look here at all the different kinds of poker tells, and all the different ways to read your opponent in real life, and the skills you can learn that are most important. So let's look at some examples of poker tells. Well, the first one, of course, is talking or chat if you're sitting online, and in this case people will make comments about their hand or about the strength of their hand, and you have to decide whether to believe them or not. The second one is mannerisms, again attempting to portray sadness, maybe portray that they're really happy about their hand, maybe slumping over a little bit as if they're really sad, like this guy over here. And the third one is vocalizing, which isn't speech but sounds they make, maybe a sigh, or what Mike Caro, the mad genius of poker, likes to call poker clack. And we'll talk about that in a second. And all three of these fit into the same category. Strong means weak, and weak means strong. That was the secret that Mike Caro revealed a number of years ago. And so whenever you catch someone trying to convince you of something about their hand, you have to decide what it is they're trying to convince you of, and more often than not, the opposite will actually be true. So in the case of poker clack is a sound that people make. It sounds like this. Or sometimes they'll do it more than once. It's the sound you make when you're trying to make a tough decision. You say, boy, what should I do here? You hear people doing that all the time at the poker table. Well, what are they trying to convince you of? They're trying to convince you that they're making a tough decision. Translation, they probably already know the decision they're going to make. They have a very strong hand, and they're just trying to make you think they're weak. So when you hear poker clack, do not call that bet, because you're going to lose your money. So that's really all you need to know about those kind of tells. The final type of tell is betting patterns, and this is the one that is probably the most important because you can pick it up even online. This is where you take into account the sum total of all the poker actions made by a player on that hand. And let's take a look at an example of that. So we're going to go to the poker table here, and we see that we've got ace-jack under the gun, which means we're the first to act. And ace-jack really isn't a very powerful hand here. You could even fold it, but at this table, we're going to go ahead and call. And we see we get a couple other callers already, and an ace comes on the flop, and we certainly can't be sure that we're ahead here, but we're going to go ahead and make a bet, because otherwise we won't know where we're at, and we very well may have the best hand. So let's go ahead and bet $40 at this point and see what happens. Okay, well, whoa! We got called by Loose Larry, and then another 10 came on the turn, and he went ahead and bet right into us, $125. Well, now's the point we're going to have to make a tough decision. What is going on here? We still have a nice hand. We really hate to fold this, but what made Loose Larry bet into us here? He's trying to convince us that maybe he made 3 10s, or maybe he had a big hand and he was slow playing before. Well, let's total up the evidence here. First of all, Loose Larry was in the big blind, so we don't know anything about what he could be holding. Certainly a 10 would be a possibility. We know he's a loose player, and so if he had a 10 on the flop, he would definitely be the kind of guy who might call us with a 10. And the other piece of information is we see that there are a lot of draws out there, and if he did just make a good hand, he probably would be afraid that we're going to check the turn through to try to get a free draw on him if in fact we were drawn to a flush or a straight. So we add this all up, and it seems pretty likely that Larry made a big hand here. He's probably got another 10, and he didn't want to let us take a free card, so he bet out into us. This play here by Larry is called a reversal. It's when someone check calls on the flop and then all of a sudden out of nowhere bets into you on the turn. A reversal is rarely a bluff, and in this case I feel pretty confident we don't have the best hand anymore, and even if we do call here, we're not going to know what to do on the river because he's probably going to bet again. So as difficult as it is, we need to fold here, but let's go ahead and call just to see what he had. And again, remember, we should not be calling here. We're just going to do this for the sake of the video. And see, once again, he bet here on the river, so even more reason why we shouldn't have called on the turn, because now we face another difficult decision on the river. So we'll call again, but once again, we should have folded on the turn. Sure enough, there you go, 10-7. He made a very bad call on the flop by calling with just 10-7. He definitely did not have the odds to draw to that, but he got lucky and hit a third 10 on the turn, and if we had just folded like we should have, we could have made a good read on him, and we would have lost a lot less money. So there's a good example of reading our opponent, even though we didn't read his mannerisms, we didn't read any speech or text. All we did was read the moves he made and made an educated decision about what he was probably holding. So what are some other types of reliable hand tells? Well, another one is when you get check raised, especially at low stakes tables. The check raise is rarely a bluff. There are very few players at low stakes games who are sophisticated enough to pull off a check raise bluff. So when you get check raised, you better be cautious because very likely you're beat. The next reliable hand tell is what I call the sandwich bet. Say there is a player in the big blind who is a calling station and he checks, and the next player to his left decides to make a bet. Well, if you have to act after that player, you should be very cautious about calling this bet because he knows that the calling station is probably going to call when the action gets back around him, so he would be unlikely to try to make a bluff at the pot in this position. So remember that when a good player is sandwiched between you and a calling station, he's rarely going to be bluffing. And the final kind we're going to talk about is the post oak bluff, as it's called by Doyle Brunson. This is a very small, or sometimes the minimum bet. At low stakes tables you see guys doing this all the time, and rarely does it mean they have much of a hand. Usually it indicates they caught a little piece of the flop and they don't want to lose too much money, but they don't want to check, so they can't think of anything better to do, so they make a minimum bet or a very small bet. You should never do this. It's a bad play. You should not make minimum bets, but when you see someone do it, know that usually it indicates they have a poor hand. Okay, well that's all for this video. Be sure to visit testyourpoker.com to get your free Poker IQ score and to check out our other videos.